Just as moderation, rather than a widely swinging pendulum in our interaction with others, seems to be wisest and healthiest and best, there should be moderation within ourselves. The old cliche advises us not to put all our eggs in one basket. King Solomon wrote in the book of Ecclesiastes in the Bible, some 4,000 years ago or so, that it was not good to be too spiritual. Perhaps he understood that life is an integration of so many things that to pursue one at the exclusion of all others would be to partake of only the smallest part of the fullness of life, the life we're created to enjoy. Life is too precious not to be taken seriously, but it must be taken as an ensemble of comedy, tragedy, and growth. And just as there are different ways to laugh and different ways to cry, there are also different ways to grow.
I'm doing my affirmations, I'm chanting my mantra each day and night. I'm doing some visualization, seeing my aura just glowing with light. And I'm breathing real deep, sitting perfectly still, while clearing my mind as I focus my will, while listening to music from Windham Hill. 'Cause I want to be enlightened. Each morning I do meditation, I become one with the whole universe. I experience self-actualization. I'm seeing a Rolfer and getting rebirthed. And I've given up sugar, red meat and caffeine, wear crystals to keep all my energies clean. And of course I subscribe to New Age magazine, 'cause I want to be enlightened. Each Monday I go to a channeler to get some advice from the other side. On Tuesdays I get a holistic massage, and on Wednesdays I meet with my spiritual guide. I'm studying reincarnation, finding out who I have been in the past. I'm practicing manifestations in the hopes that I might make some money at last. And I throw the I Ching at least once a day, burn incense to keep evil spirits away. I'm planning a trip down to old Santa Fe, 'cause I want to be enlightened. Each Thursday I go to a workshop on opening up the unconscious mind. On Fridays I see my astrologer, and on weekends I go get my chakras aligned. I'm giving myself validation. I acknowledge myself just for being who I am. By giving up all expectation, I surrender myself to the great cosmic plan. And I'm giving myself permission to win, learning to nurture my child within, as I read for the 7th time out on a limb. 'Cause I want to be enlightened. Don't you want to be enlightened? Yes, we all want to be enlightened.
With me today on the show, I have a friend of mine, Mark Woods. And Mark has a unique spirituality, I guess, and I've asked him to come and tell us a little more about it. The closest descriptive term I think we've come up with in past conversations is that it is what you might call spiritual atheism.
I suppose if we have to put a label on it, that would fit.
Well, not a label in the sense of a box, but a label in the sense of a reference point.
Sure. Yeah.
Could you elaborate, or
I can.
Can you describe the spiritual point you're at and perhaps a little bit of how you got there?
Yeah, I will. I remember as early as 12 years old, in my mother and father's home, where they still live, in their upstairs bathroom. It was a Sunday. We had just come home from our religious meeting. I was raised in a Judeo-Christian faith. And this one particular Sunday, I remember the sermon was all about how our sect of Judeo-Christianity was the only true religion and everybody else was wrong. And I remember at that young age of 12 years old thinking to myself, well, gee, you know, and all my cousins are Catholic, okay, and we were something else. I remember thinking, really? I remember thinking, well, gee, here's all these Catholic people, and then here's all these people in the faith that I grew up in, and there's all these other people, and they all say, well, ours is, well, not all, you know, many of them say ours is the only true religion, and everyone else is wrong. And I thought, not only in this country do we have, you know, many different sects of Judeo-Christianity all over the face of the planet. We have, you know, all kinds of religions and sects inside of each one of those religions. And somehow, I think my atheism started there. It looked to me like human beings have this need, many human beings have this need to believe in something higher than we are, which is fine. I mean, everybody calls it like they see it. And for me, that's where I think stopped being convinced that there was an intelligent being kind of pulling strings or
in the sense of a person.
Everything. Right, yeah. So, I mean, and being a spiritual atheist, a dear friend of mine who used to be a priest, one night we were having dinner, and he said, well, how can you be spiritual if you're an atheist? And I can only define it what spirituality is for me, and that is staying in real close touch with my body and my spirit, and in less enigmatic terms with my feelings, you know. I was involved in an HIV support group for 3 or 4 years. And I learned a lot there. It was a lot of spiritual growth, a lot of self-esteem building sorts of things that we worked on. And the facilitator, a woman by the name of Mary Ellen, shared with me a pearl of wisdom that I've carried for a long, long time. 5 simple words. What is true for me? All my life I've been bombarded with all of these messages that carry a label of truth. You know, this is the truth, you know. I have to kind of call it like what it looks like from my point of view. I only see the world and the universe through these 2 eyes. That's the only way I see it. And it feels a certain specific way for me. And I don't know, you know, how it feels for anybody else. And even though I don't profess any particular belief in a higher power, I mean, most of my friends do. And I mean, I absolutely support them in seeing life exactly the way they see it. You know, I would never, it isn't my intention to try to convince other people that there isn't a God, you know.
There might be.
There may very well be. I just have never experienced anything that I would call God. You know, there are powers that are more powerful than I. Weather, you know, wind, sun, I feel, I experience all these things. And I certainly, all of those things I am in awe of. And just, I suppose this hocus pocus God thing, I suppose I've rejected the whole Judeo-Christian dogma because it was so destructive to me personally. I felt a lot of messages that advocated total denial of the self, particularly the sexual self. And the religion, the organized religion sort of messages caused me to lose track of my self-worth and my self-esteem. I remember the messages in our church when I was a kid was, you know, we're not worthy of anything. You know, anything that God gives us is, you know, over and above what we deserve. And I mean, what a horrible negative message to give a child. You know, and it took me 38 years to build my self-esteem to what it is today. And that's where I was coming from this place where I was taught that I wasn't worthy of anything.
Would you, or do you believe in, I guess, well, to back up, you said that you try, part of your spirituality is that you try to be very sensitive to your own spirit.
Right, yeah, keep in touch with what I'm feeling in my body and in my spirit, my emotions.
Do you believe in any kind of interaction between your spirit and other spirits?
Oh, sure, I suppose. You know, you have a spirit and I have a spirit and we interact, and there's certain people, certain spirits with whom there's a real special shared energy. And that's something kind of ethereal that I have experienced in my life. And it enriches my life more than I could express in words.
The other level, I guess I was thinking of, I was raised Catholic, and you always heard so much about praying to specific saints. And from where I stand now, I'm not sure there's any way to disprove any of that, but it seems like in most cases it was a one-way communication line. You could pray to the saint, and I don't think there's any strong reason to believe they didn't hear you, but you couldn't hear them. So it was a puzzling sort of interaction, kind of an awareness of other spiritual persons probably being present, and yet being present in such a way that your fingers never really quite touch.
Yeah. I remember when I was little, you know, going to the church that we went to and having what I called at that time experiences of God. And in retrospect, what that was for me is it was all coming from inside of me. It was my own creation, almost out of that. I thought that's what was expected of me, to have this experience of God, you know. And what has happened over the years is I give myself credit for my life and for the things I accomplish. And I honor myself and I love myself exactly for who I am and deserve. I don't even know what that means, you know. I've thought about that for years and years and years.
Well, I get to establish any kind of basis to the word deserve. You have to establish what, you know, on whose standards.
Right.
Or according to what standard does anybody deserve anything? Is it a standard of mercy and forgiveness, or is it a standard of judgment, or is it like a pass-fail class in college where you reach a certain mark or you flunk, period?
Right.
Interesting that there are religions that take all those different approaches to different degrees.
I think if there's one basic belief in my life, that is that I get to make all my own choices, and I get to live with the consequences of those choices.
So often it seems people want to be protected from all consequences, or at least all negative consequences.
Yeah.
But well, as in a conversation I had with someone else in the past, it's like being in a driver's education class simulator. You don't experience the consequences of your actions, and so it's like your actions aren't real. There's a shadowy it's as if your actions are only shadows, and like they have no real substance when there's no consequences.
Yeah.
You mentioned what I think is a very important point of learning to love oneself, and it's so important for us to understand when we talk about loving oneself that it has nothing to do with arrogance or conceit or being egocentric. It's a much healthier, much more positive thing. It has nothing to do with comparing ourselves to each other, but with discovering what we're capable of, what we can be, how much we can do.
Yeah.
what is the extent of ourself, and finding something good in ourselves.
Yeah, and for me that's been learning to accept and embrace exactly who I am. When I was a teenager, particularly going, 13 was a horrible, horrible age for me. I was very, very filled with self-loathing. And to define that for you, when I was 13, I would have rather been anyone on the planet other than who I was. And as a matter of fact, going through the early teen years, I had a whole fantasy life going on in my head, that I was someone else living another life. That's how much I didn't want to be who I was. And I won't blame that totally on religion. It was on all kinds of messages that I received as a child, by which I felt very negated. And so I had to kind of realize that to build my self-esteem and to build my being worthy to me, it was up to me. I needed to do that, to do affirmations. I learned a lot about in the HIV support group. I learned a lot about the mechanism of self-esteem. At first they said, look in the mirror and tell that person you love him. So I thought, ooh, how weird, And I did it, and I did it, and I did it, and now I talk to myself every day in the mirror. Every time I pass a mirror, I give myself a little energy.
Which is supposed to be a joke. In the general public, it seems, about being mentally unstable. But when you say you talk to yourself, do you get answered? Well, at any rate,
yes, I do.
I think it's healthy, though, because
it
too
feels
often,
healthy for me.
if you don't carry on a conversation with yourself in some way, on some level, I think it's accurate to say you really don't get to know yourself.
Yeah.
And when you think about it, there's something very strange about being someone you don't know, being someone you've never had a conversation with, being someone you have never established a basis for understanding with. As I describe it to myself, it almost sounds like some kind of schizophrenic sort of dysfunctional state, and yet an awful lot of the people I knew in college, that was the way they lived life.
Yeah.
They were so busy doing all these things that they never did get to know themselves.
Oh, and in our culture, self-esteem is not promoted at all. It's kind of like, often I've heard it referred to like some kind of kooky California thing. To love and value ourselves is a kooky California thing. It has probably singularly been the thing that gives my life the most value. Makes me very glad that I'm alive.
Which, as you said, religion is not the cause of all these things, but it does seem that a phenomenal number of people use religion as a mask between themselves and their reflection in the mirror.
Yeah. And that many religions, talking about total denial of the self, you're handed this whole package of this is all of the shoulds. I quit shoulding on myself years and years ago. No more shoulds, only ises. And that means I am today, right now. This is what I am. I accept it, I embrace it. And I constantly grow and I constantly change without trying. It just happens.
Well, like I read someplace, if you take a plant and put it in a well-lit location in good soil and give it water, it doesn't have anything to say about it. The plant is going to grow. You cannot put something in a completely healthy environment and have it stagnate.
Right. I surround myself with people who affirm me, and I offer that in return. The more I support the people in my life and being exactly who they are, it feels like the freer they are to support me in being exactly who I am. I rarely have arguments, I discuss politics, I discuss religion, I say this is what it looks like to me. What does it look like to you? Tell me about that,
It's like the old Indian prayer, to understand or to really know someone, you have to at least walk a mile in their moccasins. How can we really claim to think or decide on behalf of others if we really don't, or haven't even tried to be in them, so to speak, to see things the way they see them, to be on the receiving end of all the things they've had to go through. All the things we deal with in life do shape us, whether in large ways or small ways. And in all sorts of imperceptible ways, the effect is evident throughout our lives. So, for me, I guess, it remains that God is a person with whom I interact, but I'm learning to understand God in very, very different ways than I was told to understand Him. You mentioned before all the shoulds. Yeah, it begins to seem like we spend the first 18 years of our life being programmed and the rest of our life trying to fix the programming.
Yes.
Which, another way of looking at it, I guess, is that it becomes an adventure in honesty. One of the paradoxes it seems I've stumbled on throughout life, touching on the subject, I was raised in the Catholic Church, or I suppose you could be raised in any Judeo-Christian, or even outside the Church. Any moral setting, it seems something they all have in common is that honesty is a virtue. Honesty is a virtue. Honesty is a virtue. They drill it into you. And then you get to your teenage and adult years, and you have to find out how to deal with a thoroughly dishonest world. Because no matter how much they said it, nobody is doing it. Well, not nobody, but in a similar way. The college I went to was another same sort of paradox, which I suppose, if you want to be real nasty and use nasty-sounding words, was blatant hypocrisy. But that being that they would go on and on and on about being Christian and having required chapel and all this stuff. And I really did do my best to take it at face value and live it out, and it irritated the hell out of them. Because they weren't, there was such a weird dichotomy to the way, to me it was a very strange dichotomy to the way they structured their faith and their lives. Because they would preach all these things and they wouldn't do them, and then, but more so when I would try to do them and be an example of forgiveness and charity and honesty and all that stuff, doing my best in whatever way I could to be as honest as I could, as kind as I could, as forgiving as I could, and so forth. And somehow it just really irritated them, because they couldn't live that way and still cheat on their tests or cheat on their taxes or be irresponsible with the environment, or be irresponsible with their relationships. There's something about what I will refer to as true Christianity that challenges us to be more than what anyone has told us to be. And I don't know that any of us have quite figured out exactly what it means yet.
And that meaning is very, very individual, I think.
Oh, yeah. But as I've often said, I think it's the questions that keep us alive. I suppose in the end we need to agree that what is most important is being alive, being spiritually and in every other way, being aware.
And I ask myself, what gives that value for me?
Mm-hmm.
Why do I want to keep being alive?
What's the point of the? What's the point of the whole thing? What's the purpose? And And of course, those are the unending rhetorical questions.
Oh, and the meaning of life. What a question, and to me, I know what my life means to me, and that's all I can define, you and everyone else needs to define for him or herself what life means for them.
I've sometimes wondered, too, how potent our minds might be. There's been a lot of science fiction movies produced over the years of people winding up in situations where there was some energy in the air or something that would enhance their brain waves. And suddenly they would think something and it would happen.
Yeah.
And I wonder sometimes if there isn't at least a little bit of that with us now. And sometimes when something happens, and it could be a coincidence, but I don't know. Or it could be God, as some people would say. But I don't know. Nothing's that definite. And in all fairness, I have to ask the question, is my mind capable of generating that? And I don't know. I do thank you for being with us today, though, and sharing what I guess is a unique perspective, but sounds like a healthy one to me.
Well, it's been a real treat. Thanks for having me.
And in whatever way you understand God to be, I hope that you do find God. But then again, maybe you already have. Thank you.
Peace to you, sister.
And peace to you also.